if government leaders are Christian-minded, they will fear God. And to fear God is to fear his people, the church. Consequently, this would account for their failure to be zealous advocates of gay rights. Mr. Moderator, this brings me to my second point. The fear of the church also manifests itself in this way. Government leaders fear the influence of the church on the populations, especially as it concerns moral issues. In its 2014 article, Should Homosexuals Influence Caribbean Society More Than the Church Community?, psychotherapist Dr. Lazarus Castang states that, and I quote, "We cannot have a society that is morally all-embracing, from incest to prostitution to pedophilia to bestiality," end quote.
There is a legitimate discussion to be had on gay rights, end quote. But he then opts out of that discussion, claiming, quote, "The churches, the NGOs, and the press are well placed to fuel and have that mature conversation," end quote. Imagine that, moderator. The members of the Gonzalez administration are too immature to address gay rights. And note well, he never claimed that they feared the church. Trinidad and Tobago's Kamla Prasad-Bissessar is no better. She claims, quote, "I do not support discrimination in any form against any individual, regardless of their gender identity and their sexual orientation," end quote. But she also went on to tell the national public radio anchor, Lakshmi Singh, quote, "The issue of lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender equality is very touchy and sensitive.
The church has a prodigious influence on Caribbean governments. In his book, The Democratic System in the Eastern Caribbean, Donald Peters states, quote, "Caribbean political leaders refrain from attacking the church in situations where it is clearly aggressive. Any information coming from the priest is regarded as sacred," unquote. He further goes on to opine that, quote, "It is safe to conclude that those laws against homosexuality will remain in place as long as the church exists as an institution within the region." George Simpson, in his 2005 report, Christianity in the Caribbean Region, records the near unbreakable bond between church and governance when he claims that, quote, "The long and close relationship between religion and socio-political doctrine has persisted in many parts of the Caribbean to the present day," unquote. Separation of the church and state may seem like a noble achievement in places like America and Europe, but here in the Caribbean, it is practically non-existent.
Moderator, Caribbean governments are well aware that, quote, "rights must carry the day." Thus, their failure to address gay rights not only marks them as men and women who lack conscience, but also points to the invalidity of the proposed move. For fear of the church, Caribbean governments fail to address gay rights. Indeed, it is not fear of the church that motivates the inaction of Caribbean leaders, but rather such as perceptions of masculinity and an underlying fear of emasculation. An empirical investigation of masculinity by E.H. Thompson and colleagues identified 4 central features of masculinity. Men must be willing to take risks, love adventure, and violence. Men must avoid doing anything that appears feminine. Men must strive to be respected and admired through success and achievement. And men must remain calm in hectic and frightening situations.
Are the proposition trying to imply that the people in the Caribbean are simply more religious than those in Europe? I think not. For they have not given any statistics in favor of that. And as such, since religion could not stop the address made by the governments in Europe, The same case can be made for the Caribbean. It is therefore other influences that contribute to the failure to address gay rights in the Caribbean, such as governments in the Caribbean do not care, and thus the argument is flawed. Secondly, according to Dr. Catherine Jones, gay rights is controversial. However, since some religious organizations like the Episcopal Church in the United States voted in 2012 to bless same-sex marriage, a statement made by the Church of England and House of Bishops proclaimed that a homosexual orientation does not affect a person's dignity or worth, since everyone is made in God's image, end quote. But it further goes on to state a more ardent critic of gay rights has been the Catholic Church, which has issued justified discrimination of homosexual individuals if it promotes the common good. Moderator, the Church does not hold a universal view towards gay rights. That is, there exists plethora of possible views, and as such, their influential power is weak.
The first speaker of the opposition said, it is up to the people to decide if they want to repeal the anti-gay laws. Therefore, as we have stated in our speech, 84% of Caribbean nationals are adherents to the Christian religion. So the people will continue to stand with the church in saying that gay rights should not be legalized. He goes on to say, and I quote, this first speaker goes on to say, they have no desire to offend the population. Think about it. Who in their right mind would take up themselves and go and offend about 84% of the population? Think about it. They are committing political suicide if they ever choose to do such a thing. He goes on to say, the first speaker goes on to say, Caribbean government ignores sexuality or discriminate against homosexuals as black people were discriminated back in the day. Now tell me, how are you going to compare sexuality with ethnicity and race? This first speaker goes on to say, governments sit around and do nothing. Are you trying to say that all governments of the Caribbean are just hobby-horsing on their backsides and just taking up the political money for themselves? He goes on to say, Caribbean governments stand for nothing and believe nothing. As the Antiguans would say, nothing tal go so. People